Ok, det er mange her som vet hvem Jeffrey Sachs er. Nå tenkte jeg skulle ta det på engelsk, men jeg kan ta det på norsk siden han ikke er her. Så han er professor i politisk økonomi og internasjonal utvikling ved Columbia Universitet i New York. Han har vært rådgiver for regjeringer i Latin Amerika, Østeuropa og Russland. Han er en skarp kritiker av USAs utenrikspolitikk og deres søken etter verdenshegemoni. Han advarer mot ytterligere eskalering av konflikter, bl.a. i Ukraina, og faren for atomkrig. Han fremmer FNs ideer om fredelig samarbeid mellom nasjoner og ønsker BRICS velkommen i en multipolar verden. Og for de som ikke er så kjent med Jeffrey Sachs, så anbefaler jeg en artikkel som er oversatt til norsk på spartacus.no, som Terje driver, og der er oversatt en veldig flott artikkel som heter «En ny utenrikspolitikk for Europa». Så den er anbefalt. So we can see you, Jeffrey.
Good. What would you like me to discuss? How can I be most helpful? Because the topic is very big. Do you mean peace in Ukraine, peace in Europe, peace in the world? What would you like me to discuss?
No, that's up to you. I wouldn't say.
No, please.
Well, you had this thing about new foreign policy of Europe. That could be a start, right?
Okay. Maybe if you'll permit me just to start with Ukraine. And 10 or 15 minutes, and then we can have some discussion. Would that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Okay. Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is a war over NATO enlargement, period. And your very own Jens Stoltenberg said that on one unguarded occasion when he spoke to the European Parliament on the 7th of September, 2023. He was very, very clear. He said, and I'm quoting him, "The background was that President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That's what he sent us and was a precondition for not invading Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO, close to his borders. He has got the exact opposite." That's Jens. Honestly, I don't understand what he says. Of course, we didn't sign that because, of course, we should have agreed without question in December 2021 that this absolutely absurd, ridiculous, provocative idea of expanding NATO to Ukraine should have stopped, so as to avoid a war. But I think Jens says exactly what he feels. Of course, we didn't sign that. So Putin went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders. Why we felt this compulsion to expand NATO to Ukraine is really the issue of why Europe is in such a disastrous shape right now. I think the basic point should be very clear, and we need to know the history, not the propaganda. The history is very simple. Back in 1991, there could have been peace in Europe, and there could have been peace for generations to come. That was Gorbachev's idea. That was Yeltsin's idea. And in 1990, specifically, as part of German reunification, the United States and Germany told Gorbachev on countless occasions, by the way, from James Baker, from Hans-Dietrich Genscher, from Helmut Schmidt, from the leadership of NATO, that NATO would not enlarge 1 inch eastward to take advantage of German reunification and the end of the Warsaw Pact military alliance. The Soviet Union unilaterally disbanded its military alliance. The Soviet Union agreed to German reunification. The United States and Germany promised that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. Now, at the same time, Ukraine gained independence on the basis of neutrality, absolutely explicit that Ukraine was to become neutral on the basis of perpetual neutrality, was the phrase that was used in the establishment of an independent Ukraine. There was a third doctrine on the table in Europe in 1991, and that was called collective security or inclusive security under the Helsinki Final Act and under the OSCE. And it said very clearly, no country can undertake a military alliance that is to the threat of another country, that the security is inclusive. And it is not the right of Ukraine or anyone else to join NATO if that poses a threat to another country in Europe, specifically to Russia. So the idea of peace in Europe in 1991 was not a mystery. The Soviet Union wanted it. Yeltsin wanted it. I was Yeltsin's economic advisor at the end of 1991. I heard it from him directly many times. The basis was no NATO enlargement, collective, indivisible security, and Ukraine's neutrality. And then the United States proceeded to dismantle every one of those pillars of European security. And Europe's leaders stood by while that happened, subservient to the United States. First, the NATO enlargement began already in 1994 when President Clinton broke the US word and made the commitment to expand NATO eastward in direct violation of what had been promised. Europe was silent. The first wave of NATO enlargement was Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic in 1999. You should go back and read Zbigniew Brzezinski, our hardline national security advisor at the time, in 1997, when he wrote in the Grand Chessboard and in an article called A Geostrategy for Eurasia, that the United States had to expand NATO to Ukraine in order to weaken Russia, in order to end Russia's great power status. And this is very explicit. And Brzezinski knew in 1997 this would cause trouble, but he analyzed in his book what would Russia do, and he reached the erroneous conclusion that Russia would do nothing, that it would have no option but to accede to the Western demands. So the United States violated the first claim, which was no NATO enlargement. Then, starting in the early 2000s, the United States aimed to break the second claim, and that was Ukraine's neutrality, because the CIA and the rest of the deep state began to intervene intensively in Ukraine's internal affairs in order to put in place a pro-NATO regime. And this began very visibly with the Orange Revolution of 2004, 2005, when the United States used its instruments of unrest and protest and media control to push a second election in order to install a pro-NATO government. But if you go back to 2004 to 2010, the people of Ukraine were in favor of neutrality. They overwhelmingly did not want NATO enlargement. And that was for two reasons. One, they knew it was nothing but trouble sitting on Russia's border to invite NATO to come in. And second, Ukraine itself is a divided country between Western Ukraine with its nationalist Ukrainian population and Eastern Ukraine with its ethnic Russian population. So Yanukovych came into power, won an election in 2009-10 on the basis of neutrality. And this was overwhelmingly the view of the Ukrainian people themselves. 60% or so were consistently against NATO enlargement. But the United States does not give up. Its geostrategy was NATO enlargement. As you know, in 2008 at the Bucharest summit, the United States pushed the expansion of NATO to Ukraine and Georgia down the throats of the Europeans, as well as down the throats of the Ukrainians themselves. And the outcome of the Bucharest 2008 summit was that NATO would enlarge to Ukraine. Not that we'll see if the Ukrainian people want it, we'll see if that's in violation of past promises, but that NATO will enlarge to Ukraine. I happen to know that your country's politicians were aghast at that. They thought the United States was being completely irresponsible, but not in public, only in private. So NATO enlargement to Ukraine became the official policy of NATO in 2008. Yanukovych won office and came into the presidency in 2010 based on neutrality. And the United States, which it has a whole system to do, went to work to undermine Yanukovych. And this is work of the National Endowment of Democracy, the National Democratic Institute, the National Republican Institute, NGOs like the International Renaissance Foundation, which is the Open Society Foundation branch in Ukraine, and others went to work to build a pro-NATO media, a pro-NATO NGO world, and a pro-NATO narrative. When Yanukovych called for a delay in signing the partnership agreement in the fall of 2013, a delay, that's all, a delay. Of course, that whole US machinery went into work. Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, flew to Kiev 6 times in a few weeks. Our senators went to join the Maidan protest, and our NGOs poured in money into Maidan. This is what we call a regime change operation. And on February 21st, 2014, the European Union 3 foreign ministers negotiated with Yanukovych an end to the protests based on a unity government and early elections in the second half of 2014. But the hard nationalist right stormed the government buildings soon afterwards, and the United States immediately recognized the new government, and the European leadership, pathetically, immediately accepted a de facto non-constitutional government because the United States told it to. So again, Europe had no voice and no independence of action a day after it had signed an agreement with Yanukovych, and in which Obama and President Putin both were involved to keep Yanukovych in power in a unity government till the end of 2014. When that happened, the new nationalist regime, and it's a regime, put in power by violence, immediately started a crackdown on the ethnic Russian population, even on the Russian language. And so there was immediately breakaway protests in the Donbass and in Crimea. And these were declared to be terrorist actions by the new regime. And so military actions by incorporating right-wing paramilitaries into the Ukrainian official military began to attack the Donbass region. And as you will recall, after a lot of deaths and growing violence, Russia helped to broker the Minsk II agreements in February 2015. And the basis of the Minsk II agreements was that Donetsk and Lugansk would be autonomous regions in Ukraine because of their ethnic Russian population, and this would be enshrined in Ukraine's constitution. And this was to be guaranteed by France and by Germany. Incidentally, the model for Minsk II was South Tyrol, Italy, which is a German enclave in Italy, known well to Chancellor Merkel. And the Minsk II agreement was based on South Tyrol, that there would be an autonomous region for ethnic Russian populations, and that this would end the fighting. It was endorsed immediately, unanimously by the UN Security Council. And then the United States and the Ukrainian government said, we're not going to implement it. And the Europeans went along as usual, both Germany and France, and both have admitted afterwards, well, this was just to buy time for the Ukrainians. The US wanted NATO enlargement. By this time, the Europeans were equally hardlined. At the end of December 2021, President Putin put on the table draft security agreements between Russia and the EU and between Russia and NATO and Russia and the United States. The essence of that draft was no NATO enlargement. I spoke to Jake Sullivan, then the National Security Advisor of the United States, at the end of 2021, beseeching him, take the negotiation, make the deal, avoid the war. And he told me, don't worry, we'll do this diplomatically. Don't worry, NATO's not going to enlarge. And I said, why don't you say that publicly? He said, we don't need to say that publicly, just don't worry. This is the level of cynicism of US policymakers, I'm afraid. So the United States refused diplomacy. Russia invaded in February 2024, expanding what was already a 10-year war by that point, or 8-year war. And immediately President Zelensky said, okay, we can have peace on the basis of neutrality. And the Turkish Foreign Ministry became the mediator. And within 1 month, at the end of March 2022, a draft communique, or not a draft, a communique was issued jointly by Russia and Ukraine saying that there would be an end of the war based on neutrality. And a draft agreement was prepared and was advancing in mid-April 2022 when the United States told the Ukrainians, don't negotiate neutrality. We will defeat Russia. You don't need to accept neutrality. And Boris Johnson of the UK famously went to Ukraine in April 2022 to ensure that they don't back down, but that they keep fighting. Roughly 2 million Ukrainians have been killed or wounded since that time. Ukraine has lost on the battlefield. Russia, which had not annexed the Donbass, much less Kherson and Zaporizhia, annexed the 4 oblasts in the fall of 2022. And Ukraine's situation is extremely grave today. on the battlefield and in a collapse of politics following a massive, prolonged, very well publicized corruption that has been part of the skimming the profits of war all along. Now, all of this is to show the basic point. This war is a war over NATO enlargement. One has to be almost a fool not to know this, because we're told that explicitly, even by Stoltenberg. And anyone that has watched this and knows the basic facts knows that this is the case. And yet, until today, when the question of Ukraine's neutrality is raised, for example, in the 28-point plan of Trump, which we read about in the press, it is the Europeans that virulently object to this. This is a complete dishonesty of the European leaders, and it's a complete corruption of European diplomacy, because they know the history, which is that they actually opposed NATO enlargement. It was jammed down their throat. They know that this is the cause of war. They know that Ukraine could have been neutral and at peace. They know that Ukraine has lost territory on the battlefield because of this incessant, reckless, failed attempt to push NATO enlargement. So if you ask what's the plan for peace, the plan for peace is obvious. And that is to go back to the principles that were the basis of peace in Europe in 1991. Ukraine will be neutral, NATO will not enlarge, and European security architecture will be indivisible security. It will recognize the OSCE principle, not the NATO principle. This is what is needed. Unfortunately, Europe has no diplomacy right now whatsoever. Kaja Kallas is not a diplomat. She is a warmonger. Merz is not anything but a warmonger. Macron, with his 13% approval rating and his 80% disapproval rating, is a warmonger. Starmer's government is falling to pieces, but his main focus is on war. So I appeal to Norwegians all the time. I know that the Norwegians know the truth because I've heard it from Norwegian leaders for decades. They know the history of this. It's time to speak up, not just to be a good ally of the United States, but to be a truth seeker and a truth teller. Tell the truth, where this war came from, how it can end, because it could end today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I think among the audience here, we are not so optimistic about the Norwegian politicians. And just one thing that you may not know. Last time Norway and Russia had an armed conflict, that was in 1026, when the Viking Tore Hund, he went to Murmansk to just rob the Murmansk society. So
I'm sure that Russia provoked him, though. I'm sure of it.
Okay, so now we let some questions from the audience. And first out is Bjarne.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yes, I do.
9th of December. Thank you very much.
But I can't see you because the gentleman is in between the camera and you. There you go. Now I see you.
Wow. I can now.
If you turn
now
the
I
other
can see
way,
the
now I can
audience
see-
also.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, good.
You mentioned a gentleman called You meant...
Oh,
My God, for God's
Please.
sake. All right, here we are. 9th of December, a gentleman, I wouldn't call him a gentleman really, but he's called Boris Johnson. He's coming to Bergen to take part of a meeting here, annual meeting, talking about these things. This man, he came to Kyiv early April 22. What was his message? His message was no peace, no agreement. And important, maybe you can comment on this because you know 100,000 times more than me about this. The piece that was from the meeting in Istanbul, and the document from that meeting was basically made by the Ukrainians, not by the Russians. Maybe the Russians influenced it and pushed them, but the document which they were ready to sign was basically made by the Ukrainians.
correct.
Yes, and 22nd of April, just a few weeks or whatever after this, he was interviewed in the Daily Mail in England. What did he say? He said, if Ukraine loses, this is the end of the Western hegemony in the world.
Yes.
That is a very, very important. Really, the rat came out from the hole. Could you comment on that?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you. I have a theorem that all problems in the world go back to the British. They are the most deceitful, most violent people in modern history. By modern history, I mean the last 3 centuries. They have fought everybody. They are completely responsible for many problems in the world, including in Palestine, all over Asia, and for Ukraine as well. They invented the very war that we're in right now, but they invented it in 1853. It's the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a war of Lord Palmerston, the great imperialist, designed to push Russia out of the Black Sea. Zbigniew Brzezinski designed the current war. Although he didn't think it would be a war, he thought Russia would just give in. But he based it on the first Crimean War. So when Boris Johnson says this is a war of Western hegemony, take him at his word. He's a Bulgarian, but he is representing basically MI6. Britain is falling to pieces, but what remains is its security institutions. It is a violent country. It is behind a lot of the violent operations of Ukraine, the strikes deep inside Russia, the terrorist attacks. It's terrible. And this is strange because they seem like such nice people and they speak English so well after all. But this is actually what this is about. They're worse than the US. And they're completely Russophobic. And that Russophobia goes back 180 years. There's a very good book written in 1950 by a historian named Gleason called The Origins of British Russophobia. And he tried to understand, where did the Russophobia in Britain come from? What did Russia do wrong? Because Russia and Britain were allies against Napoleon, after all. And he determines that Russia did not cause the Russophobia. It was the British imperial mentality that Russia was large, and therefore it was an obstacle to Britain's control over the world that caused the British Russophobia. Well, Britain never lost its Russophobia. So what you observe about Boris Johnson is completely correct, but it's not just him, it's the system. And that's why Starmer is equally, absolutely as irresponsible as Boris Johnson on this policy. And why Starmer's entire government is a massive failure, because he's in office to do the bidding of MI6, not to take care of the National Health Service or anything else. and it's a complete debacle.
Okay, we have next question. Yeah.
Hello, Jeffrey. It's an honor to speak with you. I came over to Norway in 1982 with NATO, United States Air Force. I've been here ever since. I served at Allied Forces Northern Europe and Oslo for a little over 4 years. Today I teach English and junior high school social studies over here. This past week, I told my 10th graders, 15 years old, about what you're saying, what Mearsheimer is saying, and what many others are saying, the truth. The other teachers are telling the kids what Norwegian state television tells them to say. I have two questions. The first is, what can be done about the military-industrial complex, and what can be done to get the truth out to the masses? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your service today in educating young people, which is really wonderful. Unfortunately, the United States lost its democracy many decades ago, and Eisenhower told us about it in his farewell address in January 17th, 1961, when he told us about the military-industrial complex. It is stronger than ever in the United States. I now call it the military-industrial digital complex because it also includes Silicon Valley, which owns all of the media platforms, all of the AI chat systems that we're using right now. It owns the White House. It installed Vice President Vance literally at a dinner in Silicon Valley when Peter Thiel told Donald Trump that J.D. Vance would be the running mate. So we are not easily defeating this military-industrial complex. I personally believe, not to digress, but I personally believe that they killed John F. Kennedy because he wanted peace, and that no president since then has really been able to get this under control, or some have not tried to get it under control. I always looked to Europe as a saner place for this, but unfortunately I was proved wrong. I thought that Europe, because of the lessons of World War II, had really learned something profound. And that's why I know in 2008, for example, at the Bucharest NATO summit, that Norwegian leaders were against what happened. And I thought that European leaders would have an independent voice. Again, I was proved wrong because, unfortunately, for several reasons: one, the cultivation of particular politicians; second, fear; and third, Europe's own military-industrial complex. We have a wall of silence. I know, by the way, that politicians are lying in what they say, because I speak to them, and sometimes, because I've been around for a long time, they tell me the truth. And they tell me, yes, it's very hard. No, NATO's not going to enlarge. And I say, well, why don't you say that publicly? Oh, that's an interesting question, Jeffrey. President Macron said to me personally, yes, this is about NATO enlargement. But he would never say that publicly. But he said it straight to my face and repeated it with emphasis several times in a conversation that I had with him in 2023. And he gave me the Legion of Honor. So I'm not a stranger to him. So they lie. What to do about it? I don't know what we're doing. We're trying to speak up, trying to tell the truth, trying to, sometimes, like Jens Stoltenberg's statement, it's so vivid that then they say, oh, no, it doesn't mean what it says. Doesn't mean it's a war over NATO, even though he says it's a war over NATO. He says it. It couldn't be more clear. When Jens Stoltenberg stepped down from being Secretary General of NATO, the next week he said something I don't have it in front of me, but he made a statement that was quite clear that, yes, of course, this is all about NATO. And I spoke to a senior official and I said, oh, Jens is telling the truth finally. Why didn't he say it when he was Secretary General? And the person said to me, well, Jeffrey, who was he working for? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, who was he working for as Secretary General? I said, oh, the United States? He says, yes. Now he's not working for the United States. This was the next week afterwards. So the lying, the deceit, it's not a game, unfortunately. We're killing massive numbers of people and risking nuclear war in the process. So it's not a game as they think, but they treat it like a game. That's the level at which this is treated, that this is a pure game and wink, wink. It's all a big joke. You know, I know, but we're not going to say it. That's how it's treated. And all I plead for is that we have some grown-ups in power that would behave like grown-ups rather than in this terrible way that they're behaving right now. So I appreciate the question and wish I could give you a better answer.
Can we have another question?
Yeah. First, thank you for all the energy that you put into enlighten the people and for the insight that you share with us. And like Nikolai here, we are many to be very skeptical as to the Norwegian policy for peacemaking. So the Stoltenberg effect on Norway and the Nordic countries is undermining all our previous position as bridge builders, east-west, north-south. And we actually do not know how to handle it, because now Stoltenberg, as Minister of Finance, he is militarizing Norway. He is providing resources much more to NATO and to the World Bank than to the UN, again, undermining previous thinking in the Nordic countries. So I guess the main thing that we need to focus on is how do we make change, because it doesn't seem to be enough to have the knowledge. Why are they not willing to give in to when they have the insight, probably have the insight? What are the means, the methods that we can use to go into a more humanistic direction? It's not that many years back that we were thinking in totally different terms. And I remember Betty Reardon, the peace educator at Columbia University, she wrote in one of her books that perhaps they don't even think that they will provide more security by militarizing, but that it is their own positions that they are eager to protect. If that is the case, how do we change it? What is the solution orientation that we need? Thank you.
Let me just say that I, for a very long time, regarded myself as a kind of honorary child of Norway in my professional life, because Dr. Brundtland, for me, was the epitome of global statesmanship and leadership. And she brought the concept of sustainable development to the world. And sustainable development means that we look to economic well-being, social justice, environmental sustainability, and peace, that those are the four pillars of sustainable development. And I worked for Dr. Brundtland in the year 2000, 2001, when she was Director General of the World Health Organization. Her chief of staff in WHO was a young man named Jonas Gahr Støre. And I became very friendly with Jonas then. and worked very closely together on global public health issues and public diplomacy. And Norway championed global health diplomacy. It invented it, actually. Tore Godal also, and many other Norwegian leaders championed health as something that everybody could join for peace. So please don't lose heart completely, because we need you, and we need Norway to be doing this. I don't know whether it's still true, and I haven't unfortunately been to Norway in a few years, but when I used to go to Norway, there were opportunities for face-to-face meetings with your political leaders. It's because of the compact size of your country, not in kilometers squared, but in population, and a very nice tradition of democracy and social democracy in Norway, very important one. There was still such thing as face-to-face discussion. And we don't have that in the United States. We have nothing like that. So we don't even imagine you could speak to the President of the United States and force one honest sentence out of them. Nothing like it. But maybe in Norway, it's still possible for you to have a direct conversation with your prime minister or with your finance minister. I would try it. I'd fly over to Oslo for that also. They know me well. Or I would join by Zoom if they want. Or if I promise not to come, maybe they would agree to meet you. I don't know. But in any event, this is, I think, what I would try, because I think there is something deep and valuable in Norway's political tradition that I hope can still be saved. We don't have it anymore in the US. Our political system is an empire. I think a question for Norway is it just part of the American empire, or does it have an independent political life? The truth is, everything about the Nordic countries has dismayed me in recent years. So it's not Norway alone. The same in Finland. Finland had neutrality, and Finland rose in the rankings that I produce each year as the founding editor of the World Happiness Report. Finland was #1 in the world. Norway always in the top 2 or 3. So this was not an unhappy part of the world, your part of the world. And Finland was extraordinarily successful. And then when President Stubb dares to say to Zelensky, don't take neutrality, that's terrible, learn from us. The real lesson of Finland is how extraordinarily successful it was, how it produced a country of peace, prosperity, and happiness. And that's the lesson also for Sweden, completely forgotten in Sweden. So basically, I don't have a full explanation of why the European politicians, even in places like Finland or Norway, or Denmark or Sweden, which I used to view, absolutely as the pinnacle of politics and social achievement, why they won't tell the truth right now. And what's strange is Trump, who I can't stand, as you can imagine, is actually offering an off-ramp to this war. And the Europeans are the ones saying, no off-ramp, more war, more war. This is so peculiar. I don't want to say anything positive about Trump because he's a disaster. But on the other hand, he's also just saying, we don't want to fight this war anymore. And the Europeans are saying, yes, we do. Yes, we do. We need to continue to fight. We can't even talk about NATO neutrality. We can't, non-NATO enlargement. So it is very dismaying and completely against the modern history of the Nordic region and of Scandinavia, which was a peace-loving region, understood the value of neutrality, was at peace. I didn't know the date that it went back to 1026. That's good to know. But this is absolutely real. And we can't give up on this. I'm sad to say, by the way, that something went so wrong in Germany, and that's never a good thing. That is never a good thing. But Merz is almost like a politician in a strange way, wanting revenge against Russia. It's unbelievable. It's terrible. Not one word of peace from that man since he became chancellor. Not one word of diplomacy. Not even an idea that a German chancellor should at least reach out before he starts promoting war. Didn't even try. Not for 1 second. And van der Leyen, as completely wrongly directed as I can imagine. That's not your responsibility. You're not in the European Union. But the European Union has lost its way completely at the institutional level. The European Commission is worse than worthless. It's absolutely committed to war. This is shocking. I don't know what they think is going to happen if they actually get their way.
Jeffrey, do we have one more question?
One more, yeah.
Okay. Or comment.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Sachs. My name is Ove Haukenes. It's great to see you. And one of your podcasts were one of the first where I saw some resonance from my own intuitions, and it's really important you do all these talks. I'm working as a philosopher, part-time at UIT, sometimes a musician, and my original question was, because I'm working on a peace plan based on the Galtung inspired framework, together with some pensioned experts on the field who no longer need to fear for their job. And my question would be, how would EU sabotage such a peace plan, which we now know? So, and you also elaborated on it recently, just now. So I have an updated question. Because the more I've been working on this plan and the more we discuss it, I have started to get this eerie and quite terrible feeling that, well, to have a good peace plan, you need to know which war are you addressing. And the more we write, I'm starting to wonder, is the fact perhaps in some ways that we're looking at Europe being attacked by the United States?
Interesting, yes.
And I will elaborate a little bit before the response, because the science is that, okay, you can take a country by military might, you cannot take a continent. You need to take a continent by ruining its energy supply, by taking over its food production, by creating your own supply lines and then protect those with military might. And the US has bought, 20-30% of Western Ukraine food production lands. There's a lot of imperial, economic imperialization, BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard. And I'm starting to look at this, that the same systematics are going on in Europe, as we have seen in the Middle East, as we are seeing around Taiwan, and as has been in Latin America. It's much the same playbook, and I know the question is kind of speculative. I hope you're open to speculate. I would love to hear your thoughts on this idea.
Good question.
Yes, thank you very much. That's very ingenious, by the way, and I think could well be correct. By the way, for you and for everybody else, my email address is sachs@columbia.edu. And feel free to continue any conversation or to exchange documents. I write a lot. I'm happy to send you things. So please be in touch. There is definitely, from the US point of view, a very strong resource optic to America's wars. So we absolutely go to war where there's oil and gas. That's you guys, by the way.
Yeah.
We go to war where there are major resources. Trump is absolutely unhappy that because of global warming, the northern route and the Arctic is gaining significance. And the U.S. actually has very little Arctic territory. It only has Alaska. And so this is why he is not facetious in his bombastic, vulgar way when he talks about Canada becoming the 51st state, because that would give the United States the Arctic, and it would give vast resources. And Trump is completely pissed off that Russia is a larger size than the United States. But if Canada were joined to the US, we would each have 17 million square kilometers. And so the US would be back in the running. So I don't put it past a US regime to go to war with Canada. I certainly think it's odds on that by the end of the administration, somehow the US controls Greenland. It's going to say one day that there are Chinese submarines off the coast of Greenland, and the US military presence urgently needs to be expanded, and the Prime Minister of Denmark will say, oh yes, please, Donald, we'll be so grateful if you will protect Greenland for us. And the US will end up taking Greenland. I think that this is quite likely. So I think you're right. And what we're seeing actually even in these hours, which may prove your point, is a war against Venezuela. We've already seen sabotage operations taking place inside Venezuela. The CIA has been tasked with destabilizing Venezuela. The US has put literally a $50 million bounty on the head of the country, as if this is normal, that you put a prize for bringing the head of government of another country down. But why? Because Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the whole world, actually bigger than Saudi Arabia's, although they're heavy oil. But they are still, the Orinoco Belt is the largest oil reserves on the planet. And Trump is going to try to take them, probably quite soon, maybe within hours or days. So I think your surmise is quite an interesting one. I wouldn't discount it. I think that the way Trump is, of course, unusually crude, and he gives us the advantage of saying out loud what others don't often say, because he's just vulgar without filter. And his idea is that the valuable resources of the world should be in U.S. hands. So I think this is absolutely correct. What is amazing is how Europe plays along with all of this, and just doesn't have. I don't want it to become a military against the United States. I want it to stand up for basic principles of European sovereignty, peace, and diplomacy. What has gone extraordinarily weird, in my view, is the complete absence of diplomacy at this point. No senior European meets with the senior Russian official, period. It's unbelievable. Why doesn't your prime minister go speak with President Putin? Maybe it's unsatisfactory or not, but have a meeting, discuss, get a perspective. What possibly could be the reason for not doing that? None that I can see, except that the truth might come out. And this is, I think, the single biggest failing for Europe is no sense of Europe and no sense of diplomacy right now. But I think you're on the right track.
Thank you. So, Jeffrey, thank you for your time. And,
Thank you. Thank
I
you
just-
for all that you're doing.
Yeah, I noticed that we can send you emails and continue discussions. So,
Very good.
thank you very much.
Thanks to everybody. Thank you.